Hey guys, tonight we are venturing deep into the emerald heart of the ancient Mesoamerican rainforest, to a time when cities rose like mountains from the jungle and a bitter, potent bean was more valuable than gold. We're going to uncover the sacred rituals and meticulous preparations behind ancient Mayan ceremonial cacao. Imagine the humid air thick with the scent of damp earth and exotic blossoms, the distant calls of howler monkeys, and the rhythmic chant of a Mayan priest as he prepares a frothy, revered beverage, not for a sweet treat, but for divine communion. This isn't your comforting hot chocolate before bed. This is a powerful, transformative elixir, a food of the gods. And honestly, with its unsweetened, often spicy kick and the complex ritual surrounding it, if you were suddenly transported back and offered a ceremonial cup, you probably wouldn't survive the social etiquette, let alone the intense, unfamiliar flavors, without at least a polite cough. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in, maybe drop a comment to let us know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always a joy to see our global community gathering for these historical deep dives. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing at the edge of a Mayan city, perhaps Tikal or Palenque, limestone pyramids piercing the dense green canopy. The air is alive not just with the sounds of the jungle, but with the murmur of a civilization deeply connected to the spiritual and natural world. And central to that connection is cacao, the Mayan word for the cacao bean, a substance they revered for well over 2,000 years, long before Europeans ever dreamed of chocolate bars. The ancient Maya didn't consume cacao as a sweet, solid confection. Their preferred method was as a drink, often frothy, usually bitter, and frequently mixed with spices, chilies, and other potent ingredients. This wasn't an everyday beverage for quenching thirst. It was a sacred element, a divine gift playing a vital role in ceremonies, feasts, religious rituals, and even diplomatic exchanges. Its preparation was not a casual affair, but a careful, often lengthy ritual in itself, steeped in tradition and spiritual significance. The journey of the cacao bean from the tree to the ceremonial cup was a long and fascinating one, a testament to Mayan ingenuity and their profound respect for this food of the gods. It was more than just a drink. It was a symbol of life, fertility, and power, a medium for communicating with the divine, and a currency both literal and metaphorical. Forget your instant cocoa powder packets. This was the real deal, prepared with intention and reverence. As you breathe in the humid air, you can almost catch a faint, earthy, and intriguingly bitter scent that hints at the sacred preparations taking place within temple kitchens or the homes of nobles. The Maya, one of the most sophisticated civilizations of the ancient Americas, flourished for centuries, developing complex writing systems, advanced mathematics, a remarkably accurate calendar, and breathtaking art and architecture, all while nestled in an often challenging tropical environment. Cacao was an integral part of this rich cultural tapestry, its use documented in their intricate hieroglyphic texts depicted on beautifully painted pottery, and even found as residue in ancient vessels, offering us tantalizing glimpses into its importance. Indeed, cacao beans were so highly valued that they were used as currency in marketplaces throughout the Mayan world and beyond, used to buy everything from food and cloth to, well, other valuable commodities. Talk about having your money and drinking it too, though they probably weren't making change with half-eaten beans. Historians still argue whether the very earliest widespread use of cacao among the Maya was primarily for its stimulating pulp by all levels of society, or if its more ritualistic bean-based beverage form was always an elite or sacred practice from the outset. What is clear is that by the classic period around 250 to 900 CE, cacao, as a prepared drink, was deeply embedded in the highest echelons of Mayan life and ceremony. It wasn't just a status symbol, it was considered to have divine properties, a direct link to the gods and the sacred narratives that underpinned their understanding of the cosmos. The preparation of this drink, therefore, was not merely cooking. It was an act of transformation, imbuing the beans with spiritual power. So let's step closer and begin to uncover the ancient secrets of this jungle jewels journey from humble pod to hallowed potion. You're now beginning to appreciate that for the ancient Maya, cacao was far more than just a pleasant agricultural product. It was a substance deeply interwoven with their spiritual beliefs, a true gift from the gods. To understand the reverence with which they prepared their ceremonial cacao, you first have to understand the stories they told about its origins, the myths that elevated the cacao tree and its precious beans to a sacred status. These narratives passed down through generations painted cacao not as something merely discovered, but as something divinely bestowed upon humanity. In the rich tapestry of Mayan mythology, the gods were intimately involved in the creation and sustenance of the world, and they often had specific domains and gifts associated with them. The cacao tree Theobroma cacao, meaning food of the gods in Greek, Jure, a name given much later by Linnaeus, but one that perfectly captures its ancient status, was often linked to key Mayan deities. One of the most significant connections is with the Mayan maize god Hun Hunahpu, a central figure in their cosmology representing life, death, and rebirth, much like the cycle of maize itself. In some creation myths, it's told that cacao, along with maize and other vital foods, was discovered within a mythical sustenance mountain, or split mountain, which was broken open by the gods to provide these essential gifts to humankind. Cacao was thus seen as one of the foundational elements of Mayan civilization, a divine provision necessary for life and ritual. Imagine the Mayan elders gathered in the firelight, recounting these sacred stories to the younger generations. They might speak of how the plumed serpent Kukulkan or Gutumats, in some Quiche Maya texts like the Popol Vuh, a powerful creator deity associated with wind, rain, and wisdom, played a role in bringing knowledge of agriculture, including cacao cultivation, to the people. These weren't just bedtime stories. They were foundational truths that shaped their worldview and their relationship with the natural world. The cacao tree wasn't just another plant in the rainforest. It was a living link to the divine, a sacred trust from the gods themselves. The mainstream historical fact is that depictions of cacao pods and beans appear in Mayan art and hieroglyphs associated with gods' rituals and the underworld, underscoring its profound religious significance. You might also hear whispers in these ancient tales of specific cacao deities or patrons. While a single universally recognized god of cacao is, a bit simplistic, various gods had strong associations with it. God El, an aged deity, often depicted with a wide-brimmed hat, adorned with owl feathers and smoking a cigar, was a powerful god of merchants' wealth and the underworld, and cacao being a valuable trade good often fell under his patronage. Vessels depicting God El sometimes show him with cacao pods or associated symbols. The beautiful, youthful maize god himself is frequently shown in intimate connection with cacao trees, sometimes even being reborn from a cacao pod, symbolizing the interconnectedness of these life-giving substances. There's a rather intriguing, if somewhat fringe, idea that some Mayan communities might have held specific beliefs about the spirit of the cacao tree itself, perhaps believing that each tree had its own guardian or essence that needed to be respected and propitiated. Some rituals might have involved making offerings directly to the trees before harvest, a kind of apology or thanksgiving for taking its fruit. This isn't widely documented in the grand codices, but in the folk beliefs of agricultural communities, such intimate animistic connections are common. They might have even believed that whispering certain prayers or incantations while tending the groves would result in a more potent, spiritually charged harvest, a sort of divine pep talk for the beans. The Tuba Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Quiche Maya, though recorded post-conquest, contains echoes of these ancient beliefs detailing the cosmic ballgame played by the hero twins Hunahpu and Xbalanque. While not always directly mentioning cacao in every version or interpretation, the underworld Xibalba, where much of their adventure takes place, was seen as a place of both death and potential rebirth, and cacao, with its dark, rich properties and stimulating effects, often had chthonic underworld associations as well as celestial ones. It was a bridge between worlds, a substance that could be used in rituals pertaining to ancestors, gods of the earth, and the cycles of life and death. The very bitterness of the cacao drink, so different from the sweet chocolate we know, might have been part of its sacred appeal. In many cultures, bitter substances are associated with medicine, with spiritual purification, or with heightened states of awareness. The Maya weren't seeking a sugary treat. They were engaging with a powerful, complex flavor profile that spoke of the earth, the jungle, and the mysteries of the divine. Historians still argue whether the very earliest Olmec civilizations, from whom the Maya inherited many cultural traits, including possibly cacao use, had an even more complex mythology surrounding cacao that was later adapted or partially lost by the Maya. The threads of these ancient stories are sometimes tangled and faded, but the core message remains cacao, was a sacred substance, a divine inheritance, and its preparation was an act that connected the Maya to their gods and the very origins of their world. This profound belief system was the invisible ingredient in every ceremonial cup. You're now steeped in the Mayan understanding that cacao was no ordinary plant, but a divine bequest, a sacred substance intertwined with their gods and creation stories. This profound reverence naturally extended to how the cacao tree itself was cultivated. Growing cacao wasn't just agriculture for the ancient Maya. It was a sacred duty, a careful nurturing of a divine gift. They didn't just scatter seeds and hope for the best. They created specialized environments, sacred groves, if you will, where these precious trees could thrive under meticulous care. Imagine yourself walking into one of these ancient Mayan cacao groves. You leave the brighter, more open areas of cultivated maize fields and step into the dappled shade of the rainforest understory. Cacao trees, Theobroma cacao, are naturally understory plants. They don't appreciate harsh, direct sunlight or strong winds. So the Maya would have cultivated them in carefully selected or prepared locations, often beneath the protective canopy of taller mother trees like ceiba rubber or zapote trees. These larger trees provided the necessary shade, helped maintain humidity, and contributed to the rich leaf litter that nourished the soil. It was a form of agroforestry, an intelligent, sustainable system that mimicked the natural rainforest environment. This is a mainstream historical fact. The ancient Maya cultivated cacao primarily in the warm, humid lowlands, often in shaded groves or using an agroforestry system that provided the understory conditions necessary for the cacao tree's delicate growth. The heartland of cacao cultivation for the Maya was in the tropical lowlands of present-day Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, and southern Mexico. Regions like the Soconusco on the Pacific coast of Chiapas were particularly renowned for producing high-quality cacao prized throughout Mesoamerica. The soil needed to be fertile and well-drained, and access to water, either through rainfall or proximity to rivers and cenotes. Natural sinkholes was crucial. You might see small, carefully tended plots, perhaps within a larger family landholding, or more extensive groves managed by the elite or temple complexes, specifically for ceremonial and tribute purposes. The tending of these cacao trees was likely a year-round task filled with its own small rituals and observances. The trees are quite delicate, susceptible to various diseases and pests. Mayan farmers would have needed to be vigilant, clearing away competing undergrowth, perhaps gently pruning the trees to encourage healthy growth and fruit production, and protecting them from animals like monkeys or kinkajous that also have a taste for the sweet cacao pulp. You can picture a Mayan farmer, his skin gleaming with sweat, in the humid air, moving quietly through his grove, his eyes expertly scanning each tree for signs of trouble or promise. There was an intimacy with the plants, an understanding born of generations of observation. There's a rather charming, though not universally proven tidbit that some Mayan farmers might have talked to their cacao trees or even sung to them, believing it encouraged better growth and a more potent harvest. While this sounds a bit whimsical to our modern ears, it reflects a deep-seated belief in the interconnectedness of all living things, and the idea that human intention and respect could influence the natural world. Perhaps specific chants or prayers were associated with planting new seedlings or with the flowering and fruiting seasons. They might have seen each tree not just as a source of beans, but as a living entity deserving of respect and gentle persuasion. The propagation of cacao trees itself would have been a careful process. While seeds could be planted, grafting techniques might also have been known to preserve the qualities of particularly good trees, though historians still argue whether advanced grafting as we understand it was a widespread Mayan practice for cacao, or if they primarily relied on seed selection and careful tending of naturally occurring superior specimens. Regardless, ensuring a continuous supply of high-quality cacao for both consumption as currency and for sacred rituals was paramount. You might also imagine that these cacao groves weren't just agricultural spaces, but were imbued with a certain sanctity. Perhaps small shrines or offering places were established within or near the groves, where farmers could leave offerings of copal incense flowers, or even a bit of their own blood in a personal act of devotion, seeking the favor of the rain gods, the earth deities, and the spirit of the cacao itself. The rustling of the leaves in such a grove might have been interpreted as whispers from the ancestors or the gods, the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy creating an atmosphere of reverence and quiet contemplation. The very layout of a cacao grove could have symbolic meaning. The careful spacing of trees, the choice of mother trees, the orientation towards sacred landscape, features like hills or cenotes. All these could have been part of a holistic approach that blended practical horticulture with deep spiritual understanding. The Maya were master observers of the natural world, and their agricultural practices were sophisticated, often tailored to specific microclimates and soil conditions. For a crop as divinely significant as cacao, this care would have been amplified. They weren't just growing beans, they were cultivating a conduit to the sacred, nurturing the very substance that would fuel their most important rituals and connect them to the cosmic order. Each healthy pod ripening on the tree was a testament to this careful, reverent partnership between humans and the divine plant. You're now standing within the sarin-dappled light of an ancient Mayan cacao grove, the air humid and fragrant. The precious trees carefully tended with a blend of horticultural skill and profound reverence. You've seen how these plants considered a divine gift were nurtured. Now the time has come for the next crucial step in the journey of the sacred bean, the harvest. This wasn't a rough, indiscriminate stripping of the trees. The harvesting of cacao pods by the ancient Maya was a careful, selective process imbued with its own significance and perhaps accompanied by specific rituals or observances. Imagine the Mayan farmer, or perhaps a designated ritual harvester, entering the cacao grove as the pods mature. Cacao pods don't all ripen at once, even on the same tree. They grow directly from the trunk and main branches in a rather whimsical fashion, and their colors change as they ripen, from green or purple to vibrant yellows, oranges, or deep reds depending on the variety. The harvester would need a keen eye to select only those pods that were perfectly ripe, their beans plump and their surrounding pulp at peak sweetness. This selection was crucial as underripe or overripe pods could affect the quality and flavor of the final cacao. Mainstream historical fact indicates that ancient Mesoamerican cultures, including the Maya, developed sophisticated knowledge of cacao varieties and the optimal ripeness for harvesting pods, ensuring the best quality beans for consumption and trade. The tool for harvesting would likely be a long pole with a sharp blade or a hooked knife attached to its end, allowing the harvester to reach pods growing high on the tree or on less accessible branches without damaging the delicate flower cushions from which future pods would grow. You can picture the harvester moving with a practiced grace, his movements economical and precise, carefully cutting the stem of each chosen pod, letting it fall gently to the ground or perhaps into a waiting net or basket carried by an assistant. There's a sense of respect in the action and understanding that these are not just fruits, but containers of a sacred essence. As the pods are gathered, they might be collected in large wicker baskets or net bags, their colorful ridged husks a vibrant sight against the green of the jungle floor. You might see the harvesters pausing, perhaps offering a brief prayer of thanks or a small offering, a sprinkle of maize meal, a few drops of water, to the spirit of the cacao tree or the earth gods for the bounty provided. These small acts would reinforce the sacred nature of the harvest, a constant reminder that they were participating in a cycle of giving and receiving with the divine world. Once a sufficient number of ripe pods were collected, the next step was to open them and extract the precious beans. This would often happen right there in the grove or at a nearby processing area. The pods themselves are quite tough and leathery. They would be carefully split open, perhaps with a sharp stone tool or a sturdy wooden machete-like implement. Imagine the satisfying crack as the husk yields, revealing the treasure within a cluster of 20 to 60 cacao beans, each encased in a sweet white mucilaginous pulp. This pulp is surprisingly delicious with a tangy, sweet tart flavor, and it's thought that ancient peoples may have initially been attracted to cacao for this edible pulp long before they discovered the secrets of processing the beans themselves. The extraction of the beans and their surrounding pulp would be done by hand. You can see figures, perhaps women and older children, carefully scooping out the sticky mass of beans, nya, and pulp from the opened husks, placing them into baskets or onto large leaves laid out on the ground. The empty husks themselves weren't necessarily wasted. They might have been used as mulch, or perhaps even burned to create an ash that could be used as a fertilizer or a component in pottery making. The Maya were resourceful, and every part of a sacred plant might have had its purpose. There's a quirky, though speculative tidbit that suggests some Mayan communities might have had specific harvest songs or chants that were sung during the gathering and opening of the cacao pods. These songs might have been believed to appease the spirit of the trees, ensure a good fermentation process for the beans, or simply to bring a joyful communal spirit to the labor. While direct evidence like musical notation is lacking, the importance of song and chant in other Mayan rituals makes this a pleasing if unconfirmed possibility. It adds a layer of human artistry to the practical task. Historians still argue whether the harvesting and initial processing of cacao for specifically ceremonial or elite use was always conducted by specially designated individuals like priests or ritual attendants, or if it was a more communal activity that was simply imbued with greater ritual significance when the beans were destined for sacred purposes. It's likely a combination, with particularly important harvests for major ceremonies, perhaps involving more elaborate ritual protocols, and specialized personnel, while everyday harvests for local use or trade might have been less formalized, though still undertaken with respect for the sacred crop. The air in the grove during this process would be filled with the sweet, slightly fermented aroma of the cacao pulp, a fragrance very different from the chocolatey scent we associate with the processed beans. It would be a busy, focused activity, yet one underscored by a sense of reverence. These weren't just agricultural laborers, they were the first guardians of the sacred bean, the ones who carefully ushered it from its life on the tree into the human world, ready for the transformative processes that would unlock its true power and prepare it for its ultimate destiny in the ceremonial cup. Each bean coated in its sweet white blanket held the promise of that divine elixir. You've witnessed the careful, reverent harvest of the cacao pods, their tough husks cracked open to reveal the precious beans nestled in their sweet white pulp. This pulp, tangy and refreshing, was likely enjoyed as a treat in itself. But for the beans to transform into the potent ingredient for the sacred Mayan cacao drink they needed, to undergo a crucial, almost magical process fermentation. This wasn't just a passive waiting game, it was a carefully managed alchemical transformation that unlocked the very essence, the foundational flavors and aromas of what we recognize as chocolate. Without fermentation, cacao beans would taste nothing like the rich, complex substance revered by the Maya.
Imagine the scene: the freshly harvested beans, still clinging to their sticky, sugary pulp, are gathered together. In many traditional methods, which likely echo ancient practices, these beans would be piled into heaps on large leaves such as banana or plantain leaves, spread out on the ground. Or they might be placed into shallow wooden boxes or even baskets lined with these leaves.
The pile of beans and pulp would then be covered with more leaves, creating a warm, moist, and enclosed environment. A perfect incubator for the microorganisms that would perform the fermentation magic. This is a mainstream historical fact. The fermentation of cacao beans, a critical step in developing chocolate flavor, was practiced by ancient Mesoamerican cultures, including the Maya, by piling the fresh beans and pulp and allowing natural yeasts and bacteria to convert the sugars in the pulp.
For the next few days, typically ranging from 3 to 7 or even 8 days, depending on the ambient temperature, humidity, and the specific traditions of the community, a complex series of microbial events would unfold within these covered piles. Initially, yeasts naturally present on the cacao pods and in the air would begin to feast on the abundant sugars in the pulp. This yeast activity produces alcohol, ethanol, and carbon dioxide, and it also generates heat.
The temperature within the fermenting mass of beans would begin to rise significantly, often reaching 45 to 50 degrees Celsius, around 113 to 122 Fahrenheit. You could almost feel the gentle warmth radiating from these fermenting heaps, a sign that the transformation was underway. The sweet, fruity aroma of the pulp would begin to change, taking on a more alcoholic, vinegary scent as the process continued. During this initial alcoholic fermentation phase, the pulp surrounding the beans would gradually liquefy and drain away. This is important because the pulp itself, if left on, would prevent proper drying later and could lead to off flavors. As the yeasts consume the sugars and produce alcohol, the environment becomes less hospitable for them and more favorable for the next wave of microorganisms, acetic acid bacteria. These bacteria convert the alcohol produced by the yeast into acetic acid, the primary component of vinegar. This is why the smell of fermenting cacao often has a distinctly vinegary note during this stage. The production of acetic acid further increases the temperature within the bean mass and also helps to kill the germ of the cacao bean, preventing it from sprouting and initiating a cascade of chemical changes within the bean itself.
These chemical changes inside the bean are what truly develop the precursors to chocolate flavor. The heat and the acids produced during fermentation break down cell walls within the bean, allowing various compounds to mix and react. Complex sugars are broken down, proteins are modified, and bitter polyphenols are transformed. It's during this intricate dance of biochemistry that the characteristic bitterness of raw cacao is reduced, and the complex flavor notes, fruity, nutty, floral, earthy, that we associate with fine chocolate begin to develop in their embryonic form. Without this fermentation, the beans would remain overly bitter, astringent, and lacking in these desirable flavor precursors. The Maya would have needed to manage this process carefully. The beans would typically be turned or mixed periodically, perhaps once or twice a day, to ensure even fermentation to aerate the mass as the acetic acid bacteria need oxygen, and to prevent overheating in any one spot which could kill off the beneficial microbes or lead to undesirable flavors. You can picture Mayan farmers, their hands stained with the dark fermenting juices, carefully turning the piles of beans, their noses keenly attuned to the changing aromas, judging by scent and experience when the process was nearing completion. It was a skill honed over generations. There's a quirky and rather delightful tidbit that suggests some traditional cacao farmers even today, in areas where ancient practices persist, might listen to their fermenting cacao, believing that the sounds, the subtle crackling, hissing, or gurgling within the pile, can indicate the stage and health of the fermentation. While this might sound like folklore, it could reflect an intuitive understanding of the microbial activity and gas production happening within. Perhaps ancient Mayan priests or skilled cacao preparers also possessed this sensory acuity, their ears as finely tuned as their palates. Historians still argue whether the ancient Maya fully understood the precise microbiology of fermentation as we do today, or if their methods were developed purely through empirical observation, trial error, and the careful passing down of successful techniques. It's almost certain they didn't know about specific yeast strains or bacterial species, but they clearly knew what worked. They knew that this period of seemingly controlled decomposition was essential to transform the raw, unpalatable bean into something worthy of the gods. This magical, odorous, and vitally important period of fermentation was the invisible heart of cacao preparation, the secret handshake that coaxed the divine essence from the humble bean. You've journeyed with the sacred cacao beans through their transformative fermentation, a crucial period where unseen microbial alchemy unlocked the very precursors of their divine flavor and aroma. The air around those fermenting heaps would have been pungent, a mix of fruity alcoholic and vinegary notes, a sign of the powerful changes afoot. Now with the fermentation complete, the beans still moist and dark brown are ready for the next vital stages in their preparation for ceremonial use, drying and roasting. These processes, seemingly simple, were also performed with care and intention, further refining the character of the food of the gods. Once the Mayan cacao preparers judged that the fermentation had reached its optimal point, a decision likely based on the aroma, the appearance of the beans, and generations of experience. The still wet beans would be carefully spread out to dry. The most common method then, as now in many traditional settings, was sun drying. Imagine large woven mats, or perhaps cleared clean patches of packed earth covered with these precious beans, laid out under the warm gaze of the tropical sun. You can see figures. Perhaps women diligently tending to these drying beds, turning the beans regularly with wooden rakes, or by hand, to ensure even exposure to the sun and air. This regular turning was crucial to prevent mold growth, which could easily take hold in the humid climate, and to ensure that all parts of the bean dried uniformly. This is a mainstream historical fact. Sun-drying was the primary method used by ancient Mesoamerican cultures, including the Maya, to reduce the moisture content of fermented cacao beans, a necessary step to preserve them and prepare them for roasting. The drying process could take several days, sometimes up to a week or more, depending on the weather, the intensity of the sun, the humidity, and whether any unexpected rain showers interrupted the proceedings. During this time, the beans would continue to change. Their color would deepen further from a reddish or purplish brown to the rich, dark brown we typically associate with cacao. Their moisture content would drop significantly from around 60% after fermentation down to about 6 to 8%. This desiccation not only preserved the beans, preventing spoilage, but also concentrated their flavors and allowed for further subtle chemical reactions that continued to develop their aromatic profile. The acrid vinegary smell of fermentation would gradually dissipate, replaced by a more mellow, slightly acidic, and increasingly chocolatey fragrance, though still a world away from the aroma of fully roasted beans. If the sun was uncooperative, or perhaps for specific types of beans or ceremonial preparations, the Maya might have also employed a gentle, slow fire-drying method. This would involve spreading the beans on a raised platform or mat above a very low, smoky fire carefully controlled to provide warmth and airflow without actually cooking or scorching the beans. This method would impart a subtly smoky note to the cacao, which might have been desirable for certain recipes or rituals. You can almost smell that delicate sweet wood smoke mingling with the earthy aroma of the drying beans, a comforting and sacred scent. Once the beans were properly dried, hard, brittle, and rattling when shaken, they were ready for the next transformative step, roasting. This was perhaps the most aromatic part of the entire process, the stage where the true familiar chocolate scent would finally be released in all its glory. Roasting was typically done in shallow, wide clay pans, much like a comal used for toasting tortillas placed over a carefully controlled fire. You can picture a Mayan woman, or perhaps a temple attendant, specifically skilled in this art, sitting before a hearth patiently stirring a batch of dried cacao beans in one of these earthenware dishes. The heat needed to be just right, hot enough to develop the flavors and loosen the outer husk of the bean, but not so hot as to burn them, which would result in a bitter, acrid taste. As the beans roasted, they would crackle and pop, and their color would darken further. The intense heat triggered a cascade of complex chemical reactions within the bean. Maillard reactions, caramelization, and the breakdown and transformation of various aromatic compounds. This is where those precursor flavor molecules developed during fermentation truly blossomed into the rich, nutty, fruity, and floral notes that characterize fine cacao. The aroma filling the air around that roasting pan would be utterly intoxicating. A warm, deep, slightly bitter, and incredibly complex scent that would have signaled to anyone nearby that something special, something sacred was being prepared. It's a smell that even today, with all our modern chocolate-making technology, evokes a sense of comfort and indulgence. For the Maya, it was the aroma of divine communion. There's a lovely, quirky tidbit suggesting that the person roasting the cacao beans might have had to maintain a state of ritual purity or focused intention during the process. Perhaps they would chant specific prayers or songs or avoid certain foods or activities beforehand to ensure that their own spiritual state did not negatively influence the sacred beans. The roasting was seen as a crucial point of imbuing the cacao with its final spiritual potency. They weren't just toasting seeds, they were awakening the spirit of the cacao. Historians still argue whether the Maya had different roasting profiles for different types of ceremonial drinks, perhaps a lighter roast for a more delicate floral beverage, and a darker, more intense roast for a more robust, bitter, or stimulating concoction. Such nuances are difficult to discern from the archaeological record alone, but given their sophisticated palate for other flavors, it's certainly plausible that they fine-tuned the roasting process to achieve specific desired outcomes, much like modern artisan coffee roasters or chocolatiers do today. The perfectly roasted bean was the key to a perfect ceremonial drink, a fragrant offering fit for gods and kings. You've followed the sacred cacao beans as they were kissed by the sun during drying, and then embraced by the fire during the aromatic ritual of roasting. The air around that roasting hearth would be thick with the intoxicating promise of the divine drink to come, a rich, complex scent that signified the awakening of the bean's true essence. Now, with the beans perfectly roasted, their brittle husks loosened, and their inner nibs full of developed flavor, the next stage in their transformation is a rhythmic, almost meditative process, winnowing and grinding. This is where the beans are meticulously prepared to release their treasure, turning them from individual seeds into a potent, concentrated paste, the very heart of the Mayan ceremonial cacao beverage. Imagine the roasted cacao beans now cooled slightly, but still warm to the touch, being gently handled. The first task is to remove the thin, papery outer husk or shell from the precious inner part of the bean known as the nib. This process is called winnowing, though the initial step is often cracking or light crushing. The roasted beans might be lightly pounded in a wooden mortar with a pestle, or perhaps rolled with a hand stone on a flat surface just enough to break the brittle shells without pulverizing the nibs within. You can hear the gentle percussive sound, a soft crackling and rustling as the shells separate. Once the beans are cracked, the separation of husk from nib would begin. This could be done by hand, patiently picking out the nibs, especially if the quantity was small and destined for a particularly sacred ceremony. For larger quantities, a more traditional winnowing technique might be employed. Picture a Mayan woman perhaps standing in a breezy spot, tossing the mixture of cracked beans and husks into the air from a shallow basket or a wide, flat gourd. The gentle breeze would carry away the lighter, papery husks, while the heavier, denser nibs would fall back into the basket. It's a graceful, practiced motion, a dance between human skill and the natural elements repeated until only the clean, dark nibs remain. This is a mainstream historical fact. Ancient Mesoamerican cultures, including the Maya, used techniques like light crushing and winnowing, using wind or fanning to separate the lighter shell from the heavier nib after roasting cacao beans. These nibs are the pure essence of the cacao, intensely flavored and rich in cocoa butter, but to become a drink, they needed to be ground into a fine paste or liquor. This was laborious, painstaking work typically performed on a metate, a traditional Mesoamerican grinding stone. The metate is a flat or slightly concave stone slab, often with 3 or 4 short legs, and it's used with a cylindrical handstone called a mano. You can picture a Mayan individual, likely a woman, as this was often female labor, though men might also participate for ceremonial preparations, kneeling before the metate, the pile of roasted nibs beside her. She would place a small handful of nibs onto the metate, and then with rhythmic, steady pressure, roll and crush them with the mano back and forth, back and forth. The friction and pressure would gradually break down the nibs, releasing the cocoa butter within them. As the nibs are ground, they transform from a coarse, crumbly texture into a thick, oily, and wonderfully aromatic paste. This paste, often called cacao liquor, though it contains no alcohol, is the fundamental ingredient for any chocolate product. The warmth generated by the grinding process would help to keep the cocoa butter liquefied, making the paste smooth and workable. You can imagine the rich, dark paste slowly accumulating on the metate, its aroma even more intense and immediate than that of the roasting beans. A heady blend of bitter, earthy, and subtly fruity notes. The rhythmic sound of the mano against the metate, a steady shush, 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 would have been a familiar sound in Mayan households and temple kitchens. A sound that spoke of nourishment ritual and the careful transformation of a sacred substance. It's a charming, if somewhat speculative, quirky tidbit that the person grinding the cacao might have chanted or hummed specific incantations or songs during the process. Given the sacred nature of ceremonial cacao, imbuing this laborious stage with spiritual intention would make perfect sense. The rhythm of the grinding itself could have been a form of meditation, focusing the preparer's mind and energy into the cacao, ensuring it was not just physically transformed, but also spiritually charged. Perhaps different rhythms or chants were used depending on the ceremony for which the cacao was destined. The fineness of the grind was crucial. For a smooth, luxurious ceremonial drink, the cacao paste needed to be ground as finely as possible. This might require multiple passes on the metate, or the use of metates with different textures, a coarser one for the initial breaking down, and a finer one for the final smoothing. Historians still argue whether the ancient Maya possessed specialized metates or manos, specifically designed for achieving an ultrafine cacao grind for elite or ceremonial beverages, perhaps made from particular types of volcanic stone, or if the skill of the grinder was the primary factor in achieving the desired consistency. The dedication to this often arduous task underscores the importance of the final drink's texture and quality. This rich, dark, unctuous cacao paste, still warm from the metate, was now ready. It held all the concentrated power and flavor of the sacred bean, transformed by human hands and ancient wisdom from a humble seed into the very essence of the divine drink. It was a substance of immense value both spiritually and materially, ready to be combined with other sacred ingredients and prepared for the gods and the privileged mortals who would partake in its potent magic. You've witnessed the laborious yet reverent transformation of roasted cacao nibs into a rich, dark, and intensely aromatic paste through the rhythmic grinding on the metate. This potent cacao liquor, the pure essence of the sacred bean, was the heart of the Mayan ceremonial drink. But the Maya rarely consumed it in this unadulterated form. Their genius lay not just in processing the cacao, but in the complex and often surprising array of other ingredients they artfully combined with it to create a beverage that was not only spiritually significant, but also a sophisticated explosion of flavor, though probably not one that would immediately appeal to our modern sugar-accustomed palates. Forget milk and sugar. The Maya had a far more adventurous and frankly more interesting spice rack. As the freshly ground cacao paste, still warm and pliable, was gathered from the metate, it would be ready for the addition of various flavorings and textures. The most common liquid base was water, often heated. But it's the other additions that truly define the character of Mayan ceremonial cacao. One of the most frequently mentioned and perhaps surprising to us ingredients was chili pepper. Yes, you heard that right. The Maya loved a bit of spice, and varieties of chili from mild to fiery were often ground and mixed into their cacao drinks. This is a mainstream historical fact. Ancient Mayan cacao beverages were frequently flavored with a variety of ingredients, including chili peppers, vanilla, allspice annatto, and flowers, and were typically unsweetened or only lightly sweetened with honey, resulting in a complex, often bitter and spicy drink. Imagine the combination: the deep, bitter notes of the pure cacao blended with the sharp, warming kick of chili. It would have created a truly invigorating and stimulating beverage, one that would awaken the senses and perhaps even induce a heightened state of awareness, perfectly suited for ritual and ceremony. The type and amount of chili would likely vary depending on the occasion, the region, and the desired effect. Some drinks might have a subtle warmth, others a more pronounced fiery punch. It certainly wasn't your grandma's comforting bedtime cocoa. But chili was just one option in their extensive botanical pharmacy. Another highly prized flavoring was vanilla. The vanilla orchid is native to Mesoamerica, and the Maya were masters at curing its pods to release that wonderfully aromatic and complex flavor. Ground vanilla beans, or perhaps vanilla-infused water, would have added a sweet, perfumed counterpoint to the bitterness of the cacao and the heat of the chili. It's a classic pairing that we still adore today, though the Maya experienced it in a far more primal and less sugary form. Spices were also key. Allspice, derived from the dried berries of the pimenta dioica tree, also native to the region, was a common addition, lending its characteristic warm, aromatic notes reminiscent of cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg, hence its English name. You might also find annatto achiote being used. The seeds of the annatto tree produce a vibrant red pigment and have a slightly peppery, earthy flavor. Annatto would not only add a subtle flavor dimension, but also give the cacao drink a rich, reddish hue, which may have had symbolic significance, perhaps representing blood sacrifice or vitality. Flowers, too, found their way into the sacred cacao cup. The Maya had a deep appreciation for the beauty and fragrance of flowers, and certain edible or aromatic blossoms might be ground or infused into the drink. Examples could include Cymbopetalum penduliflorum, known as earflower, or sacred earflower due to its shape, which imparted a spicy, peppery, almost nutmeg-like flavor, or perhaps the flowers of the Quararabia funebris tree, which had a complex maple-like or fenugreek-like aroma. These floral additions would have made the drink even more complex and perfumed, a true offering for the senses. Sweeteners were used, but sparingly, and certainly not refined sugar as we know it. Honey from the native stingless bees of the Yucatan Peninsula was the most likely sweetener if any was desired. A drizzle of this fragrant jungle honey would temper the bitterness of the cacao and the heat of the chili, creating a more balanced, though still intensely flavored drink. Agave syrup, or the sweet sap from certain palms, might also have been used in some regions, or for specific recipes. There's a quirky and rather intriguing tidbit that suggests the Maya might have occasionally added finely ground maize corn to their cacao beverages. This would not only thicken the drink, giving it more body, but also add a subtle, sweet, earthy flavor and importantly increase its nutritional value. Cacao and maize were the two most sacred and vital plants in Mayan culture, often mythologically linked, so combining them in a ceremonial drink would have been symbolically potent, a true food of the gods that sustained both body and spirit. Perhaps it was the ancient Mayan equivalent of a superfood smoothie, though considerably more sacred and probably less green. Historians still argue whether certain more unusual or psychoactive ingredients, such as specific types of mushrooms or other potent plant extracts, were regularly combined with ceremonial cacao in some shamanistic rituals to induce visions or altered states of consciousness. While evidence for this is not widespread and often speculative, the Maya certainly had extensive knowledge of the psychoactive properties of many local plants, and cacao itself, with its theobromine content, is a stimulant. The possibility that it was sometimes used as a vehicle for other powerful substances in specific, perhaps more esoteric ritual contexts, cannot be entirely dismissed. The precise combination of these ingredients would have been carefully considered a sacred recipe, perhaps dictated by tradition, by the specific deity being honored or by the purpose of the ceremony. The preparation was an art, a balancing of bitter, spicy, sweet, and aromatic, creating a drink that was not just consumed, but experienced. A complex, potent, and deeply sacred elixir. You've now learned about the incredible array of potent and surprising ingredients the ancient Maya masterfully blended with their sacred cacao paste, from fiery chilies and aromatic vanilla to exotic flowers, and perhaps even a touch of honey or ground maize. The resulting beverage was a complex, often bitter, and deeply symbolic concoction. But there was one more crucial element, one final touch of artistry and ritual significance that often distinguished Mayan ceremonial cacao, the froth. A thick, rich, and persistent head of foam was not just desirable. It was often considered the crowning glory of the drink, a mark of a perfectly prepared and spiritually potent offering. Achieving this prized froth without the aid of modern whisks or electric blenders required skill, patience, and specific techniques that the Maya honed over centuries. It wasn't just about aeration, it was about creating a specific texture and visual appeal that added to the sensory experience and ritual importance of the cacao. The Maya even had a specific verb in their language for the act of frothing cacao, highlighting its significance. This is a mainstream historical fact. The ancient Maya placed great importance on a thick, foamy head on their ceremonial cacao beverages and developed techniques such as pouring the liquid from one vessel to another from a height to achieve this desired froth. Imagine you are watching a Mayan priest or a skilled attendant preparing the ceremonial drink. They have the rich, dark cacao liquor already mixed with water and the chosen spices and flavorings in a cylindrical pottery vessel. Now, to create that luxurious foam, they would employ a technique of repeated pouring. The preparer would hold one vessel high above another, perhaps standing to achieve maximum height, and then skillfully pour the cacao liquid in a long, steady stream from the upper vessel into the lower one. You can hear the rushing sound of the liquid, see the stream narrowing and then splashing into the vessel below a cascade of dark, fragrant liquid. This action repeated multiple times. Pouring back and forth, introduced air into the mixture, agitating the fats, the cocoa butter, and proteins within the cacao, causing them to form stable bubbles. The height of the pour was critical. The greater the distance the liquid traveled, the more air would be incorporated, and the richer and more stable the froth would be. It was a physically demanding and skillful process, requiring a steady hand and a good sense of balance to avoid spilling the precious liquid. You can picture the preparer, their brow furrowed in concentration, their movements practiced and almost dance-like, as they coaxed the foam into existence. The resulting froth would be thick and often reddish-brown if annatto was used or a creamy tan depending on the ingredients. It would sit proudly atop the liquid cacao, a luscious, airy crown. Some Mayan pottery, particularly tall, cylindrical vases, often referred to as chocolate pots, seems perfectly designed for this pouring technique. Their shape would have facilitated a clean pour and allowed for the development of a good head of foam. Scenes painted on these very vessels often depict figures engaged in this frothing process, sometimes showing liquid being poured from a spouted pot into a wide-mouthed bowl or between two identical cylindrical vessels. These images are invaluable, providing us with direct visual evidence of this ancient art. Beyond simple pouring, there's evidence that the Maya may have also used a specific tool to aid in frothing, a precursor to the Mexican molinillo, a wooden whisk used to froth chocolate and other drinks. While the classic carved wooden molinillo is more associated with post-conquest Aztec and later Mexican traditions, the Maya might have used simpler wooden frothers, or even bundles of certain types of twigs, to agitate the cacao directly in the pot. There's a quirky tidbit from some interpretations of Mayan art that suggests certain scenes might depict individuals using a long, slender stick, perhaps with a carved or branched end, to vigorously stir or beat the cacao mixture to build up foam, almost like an ancient immersion blender powered by pure elbow grease. The froth itself was highly valued, perhaps even more so than the liquid beneath it. It was seen as the most desirable part of the drink, the essence of the cacao, and it may have been consumed first or spooned off, and offered to deities or high-ranking individuals. The texture of the foam, light airy yet rich, would have provided a delightful contrast to the often bitter liquid. It was also visually appealing, a sign that the drink had been prepared with skill and care fit for the gods or for important ceremonial guests. It wasn't just bubbles, it was a status symbol, a mark of quality. If your cacao didn't have a good head, you probably weren't invited to the best celestial parties. Historians still argue whether the chemical composition of ancient cacao varieties or specific additions to the drink, like perhaps a touch of saponin-rich plants, similar to those that might have been used for soap, inherently made it easier to create a stable and abundant froth compared to modern processed cocoa powder, which often lacks sufficient cocoa butter or the right proteins. The natural fats in minimally processed cacao are certainly key to good foam formation. The Maya clearly understood the conditions and techniques necessary to achieve this, turning a simple physical process into an art form and a vital component of their sacred ritual. The final presentation of the frothed cacao was paramount. Served in beautifully decorated vessels, the rich, dark liquid crowned with its luxurious cap of foam, it was a sight to behold, a true feast for the eyes as well as the palate and the spirit. That carefully cultivated froth was the final flourish, the delicious airy signature of a perfectly prepared Mayan ceremonial cacao. You've witnessed the mesmerizing, almost alchemical process of frothing the Mayan ceremonial cacao, where liquid was transformed into a divinely crowned beverage through skillful pouring or stirring. That luxurious foam was the ultimate testament to a perfectly prepared drink. And just as the preparation was an art, so too was the presentation. The vessels used by the ancient Maya for preparing, serving, and consuming their sacred cacao were not mere utilitarian containers. They were often exquisite works of art in themselves, beautifully crafted and richly decorated pottery that played an integral role in the ritual and enhanced the sensory experience of the drink. These clay vessels didn't just hold the magic, they were part of it. Imagine yourself in a Mayan palace or temple precinct where a cacao ceremony is about to take place. You would see an array of specialized ceramic vessels, each designed for a specific purpose in the cacao ritual. The Maya were master potters, and their ceramic tradition was incredibly sophisticated and varied. For cacao, they favored particular shapes and often adorned them with intricate painted scenes, hieroglyphic texts, and symbolic motifs that tell us a great deal about the drink's importance and the contexts in which it was consumed. This is a mainstream historical fact. The ancient Maya produced a wide variety of finely made and elaborately decorated ceramic vessels specifically for the preparation and consumption of cacao, with common forms including tall cylindrical vases, spouted chocolate pots, and shallow bowls often featuring scenes of courtly life mythology and cacao rituals. Perhaps the most iconic and visually striking of these are the tall, slender cylindrical vases, often found in elite burials and depicted in scenes of feasting and ritual. These vessels, sometimes reaching heights of 20 to 30 centimeters, around 8 to 12 inches, were perfectly suited for the dramatic high-pouring technique used to create that prized froth. Their smooth, straight sides would allow the liquid to flow cleanly, and their height provided ample space for the foam to develop and be displayed. Many of these vases are masterpieces of Mayan art painted in vibrant polychrome slips, with scenes of lords and ladies partaking in cacao mythological beings, associated with cacao, or even hieroglyphic texts that explicitly name the vessel as Yuchab, his/her drinking instrument for cacao. Some even name the owner or the artisan who created them, giving us a personal connection across the centuries. You might also see spouted vessels, often referred to as chocolate pots. These typically had a globular body, a handle, and a distinctive pouring spout, sometimes quite long and elegant. These were likely used for serving the prepared cacao, allowing the frothy beverage to be poured neatly into individual drinking cups or bowls without disturbing the precious foam too much. The spouts themselves are sometimes modeled into animal or human heads, adding another layer of artistry and symbolism. Imagine a priest, his movements precise and reverent, pouring the dark aromatic liquid from such a vessel, the rich froth mounting up in the recipient's cup. The drinking cups themselves could vary. Shallow, wide bowls were common, allowing the drinker to appreciate the aroma and perhaps easily spoon or sip the froth. Smaller, more rounded cups or beakers were also used. These might be simply decorated or for high-status individuals, as elaborately painted as the larger serving vases. The feel of the cool clay in the hand, the smoothness of the rim against the lips all contributed to the ritual experience. It wasn't just about taste. It was a tactile and visual engagement with a sacred substance. The clay itself, and the way the pottery was fired, could also subtly influence the experience. Some clays might retain coolness, while the porous nature of unglazed or lightly glazed earthenware could even contribute to a slight evaporative cooling of the contents, a welcome effect in the tropical climate. The colors used in the painted decorations, rich reds, oranges, blacks, creams, and the famous Maya blue, were derived from natural mineral and plant pigments carefully prepared and applied. These images weren't just decorative, they were narrative conveying stories reinforcing social status and reiterating the sacred context of cacao consumption. There's a quirky tidbit that some Mayan chocolate pots have been found with small ceramic pellets or pebbles still inside them. While some scholars suggest these might be the result of post-depositional happenings, others have speculated that they might have been intentionally placed inside to act as agitators. When the pot was swirled or shaken, these pellets would help to further mix the ingredients and perhaps even enhance the froth like ancient whisking balls. It's an intriguing idea, suggesting another layer of ingenuity in their pursuit of the perfect cup. Historians still argue about the precise function of certain unusual vessel forms found in Mayan contexts and whether they were exclusively used for cacao or had multiple uses. For example, some lidded cash vessels or uniquely shaped effigy pots might have been used for storing dried cacao beans, ground cacao powder, or even pre-mixed ceremonial blends, keeping them safe and perhaps imbuing them with additional ritual protection. The variety of forms suggests a highly specialized and nuanced material culture surrounding cacao. The beauty and craftsmanship lavished on these cacao vessels underscore the immense value placed on the drink itself. These weren't disposable cups. They were treasured possessions, status symbols, and sacred implements. They were passed down through generations, gifted in diplomatic exchanges, and ultimately often placed in the tombs of nobles and rulers to accompany them on their journey to the underworld, ensuring they wouldn't be without their divine beverage in the afterlife. Each painted scene, each carefully shaped rim speaks of a deep reverence for cacao, a substance so precious that its containers became works of art, holding not just a bitter, frothy drink, but the very essence of Mayan spirituality and culture. You've seen the beautiful, often intricately decorated clay vessels that cradled the sacred Mayan cacao, each pot and cup, a testament to the reverence in which this divine drink was held. The artistry of these containers hints at something deeper. Cacao wasn't just a ceremonial beverage or a status symbol. It was profoundly woven into the very fabric of Mayan cosmology, their understanding of the universe and their relationship with the gods. To truly grasp the ritual of its preparation, you need to understand how the Maya saw cacao fitting into the grand cosmic order. The Maya perceived a universe alive with sacred forces, where the natural world, the human realm, and the divine were intimately interconnected. Plants, animals, celestial bodies, and even geographical features often held spiritual power and were associated with specific deities or mythological narratives. Cacao, with its origins in the fertile earth, its need for the shade of mother trees, its stimulating properties, and its deep, rich color, was a potent symbol within this worldview, often linked to concepts of life, death, rebirth, fertility, and transformation. This is a mainstream historical fact. Cacao held a significant place in Mayan cosmology, frequently appearing in their mythology, iconography, and ritual practices as a sacred substance associated with creation, the gods, particularly agricultural and underworld deities, and the cycle of life and death. Remember the Mayan creation myths we touched upon earlier, where cacao, alongside maize, was one of the vital foods revealed to humanity from within a mythical sustenance mountain. This places cacao at the very genesis of Mayan civilization, a foundational element provided by the gods for human flourishing. Its presence in these origin stories elevates it beyond mere sustenance to a primordial life-giving force. You can imagine Mayan priests recounting these tales perhaps as they prepared the ceremonial cacao, reinforcing its divine lineage and its essential role in maintaining the cosmic balance. The drink itself became a ritualized reenactment of this divine gift, a way to connect with those foundational moments of creation. The connection with the maize god Hun Hunappu is particularly profound. Maize was the staple food, the very stuff of human flesh in Mayan belief, and its god represented agricultural fertility and the cycle of life. Cacao often appears alongside maize in iconography. Sometimes, as we noted, the maize god is even depicted being reborn from a cacao pod, or with cacao trees growing from his body. This intimate association suggests that cacao shared in the symbolic power of maize representing renewal, sustenance, and the sacred energies of the earth. Preparing and consuming cacao could thus be seen as an act that nourished not just the body, but also the spirit, aligning the partaker with these fundamental life-giving forces. Cacao also had strong connections to the underworld Xibalba, the realm of the dead, but also a place of transformation and potential rebirth. God El, that powerful aged deity of merchants' wealth, and the underworld, whom we met earlier, is often depicted in scenes with cacao offerings or cacao trees, sometimes even with cacao pods, forming part of his headdress or attire. This underworld association might seem surprising for a food of the gods, but for the Maya, the underworld was not simply a place of doom, it was an integral part of the cosmic cycle. The sun journeyed through Xibalba each night to be reborn at dawn. Seeds germinated in the earth in darkness before sprouting into life. Cacao's dark color, its growth in the shaded understory, and its stimulating, almost trance-inducing properties, especially if combined with other substances, might have made it a fitting medium for rituals involving communication with ancestors or underworld deities. There's a quirky, though debated tidbit that suggests the froth on the cacao drink might have been symbolically linked to breath or life force Ik in Mayan. The act of creating the froth, of aerating the liquid and making it breathe, could have been seen as imbuing the drink with vitality, making it a more potent offering or a more life-enhancing elixir. The frothy crown wasn't just for texture, it was a visible manifestation of the drink's sacred energy. Perhaps the more froth, the more ik, the more divine connection. It's an idea that adds another layer of meaning to their meticulous frothing techniques. Historians still argue about the precise meanings of certain complex iconographic scenes on Mayan pottery that depict cacao in mythological contexts, particularly those involving the hero twins, or specific underworld deities. Some scenes show monkeys, creatures of the forest, often associated with mischief, but also with scribes and artisans joyfully consuming cacao pods or even participating in its preparation. Are these humorous scenes, or do they carry deeper symbolic weight about the wild or untamed aspect of cacao that needs to be ritually controlled and transformed for human use? The layers of meaning in Mayan art are often as rich and complex as their cacao drinks. The very trees themselves, often growing in sacred groves, could have been seen as axis mundi, or world trees connecting the underworld through their roots. The earthly realm, their trunks, and the celestial realm, their canopies reaching towards the sky. The cacao pod, then, was a fruit born of this cosmic connection containing seeds that held the potential for both physical and spiritual nourishment. Drinking ceremonial cacao was therefore not just imbibing a beverage, it was partaking in a substance that embodied the structure and sacred energies of the entire Mayan cosmos. It was a way to ingest the divine, to reaffirm one's place in the universe, and to honor the gods who made such a potent and mysterious gift available to mortals. You're now deeply immersed in the Mayan cosmos, understanding that cacao was far more than a simple bean. It was a sacred thread connecting the earthly realm to the divine, a gift from the gods imbued with profound symbolic meaning. With such significance, it's natural to wonder who exactly partook in this potent, frothy, and often bitter elixir. Was ceremonial cacao a drink for everyone, or was its consumption restricted, reserved for special people and sacred occasions? The answer, like many things in the ancient Mayan world, is complex and reveals much about their social structure and ritual life. While the sweet pulp of the cacao pod might have been enjoyed more widely by various levels of society, the prepared ceremonial cacao beverage made from the precious processed beans was primarily the domain of the elite kings, ahau nobles, priests, and perhaps high-ranking warriors. This is a mainstream historical fact. Archaeological and epigraphic evidence, including depictions on pottery and residues in vessels found in elite burials and palaces, indicates that the prepared cacao beverage was predominantly consumed by the Mayan elite, rulers, nobles, and priests, during important feasts, religious ceremonies, and diplomatic events. It was a luxury good, a status symbol, and a sacred substance not readily available to the common populace for everyday consumption, though. Commoners might have encountered it in cruder forms or as part of communal celebrations sponsored by the elite. Imagine a grand feast in a Mayan palace courtyard. Torches flicker, casting dancing shadows on intricately carved stone walls. The air is thick with the scent of incense, roasting meats, and of course, the rich aromatic fragrance of freshly prepared cacao. Here you would see lords and ladies adorned in fine textiles and jade jewelry, sipping the frothed cacao from beautifully painted cylindrical vases much like the ones we've discussed. The serving and consumption of cacao at such events was a highly ritualized affair, reinforcing social hierarchies and forging alliances. Offering a guest a cup of high-quality, well-frothed cacao was a sign of respect and hospitality. The shared drinking of cacao could seal treaties, celebrate victories, or mark important dynastic events, like accessions, marriages, or royal births. Priests, as intermediaries between the human and divine realms, were key figures in ceremonial cacao consumption. They would prepare and offer cacao to the gods in temple rituals, perhaps pouring libations of the precious drink onto altars or into sacred fires. They would also consume it themselves, possibly, to achieve a heightened state of spiritual awareness, to aid in divination, or to prepare for sacred duties. The stimulating properties of the theobromine in cacao, combined with other potent ingredients like chili, might have helped them endure long fasting periods or perform complex, demanding ceremonies. You can picture a priest in a dimly lit temple chamber, the air thick with copal smoke, chanting sacred incantations as he slowly sips the bitter, frothy brew, his mind focused on communion with the deities. Warriors, too, might have consumed cacao perhaps before battle or during important martial ceremonies. Its stimulating effects could have provided energy and focus, and its association with power and elite status would have made it a fitting beverage for those who defended the realm or sought victory. Glyphic texts and iconography sometimes link cacao to themes of sacrifice and warfare, suggesting it played a role in the rituals surrounding these intense and often brutal aspects of Mayan life. What about the common Mayan farmer, the one who perhaps lovingly tended the cacao groves? While they were unlikely to be sipping high-grade, elaborately frothed ceremonial cacao on a daily basis, the beans themselves were too valuable as currency and tribute. They may have consumed cacao in simpler, less refined forms. Perhaps they made a gruel or porridge from ground beans mixed with maize, or a more diluted, less elaborately flavored drink. They might also have had opportunities to partake in cacao during community-wide festivals or ceremonies where the elite would distribute food and drink as a form of largesse and social cohesion. There's a quirky, though not definitively proven tidbit that suggests that during certain festivals, even commoners might have been allowed a taste of a simpler form of frothed cacao, or that the froth itself skimmed from the top of the elite's beverage might have been distributed in small amounts as a special treat or blessing. It would have been a rare and memorable experience, a fleeting taste of the food of the gods. Imagine the excitement, the sense of participating, however briefly, in the sacred world of the rulers and priests. Historians still argue about the exact accessibility of cacao beans for non-elite consumption, particularly in regions where cacao was abundant versus regions where it had to be imported. While the beans were currency suggesting some level of circulation, the labor-intensive process of preparing it into a proper drink, especially the ceremonial versions, with multiple expensive ingredients like vanilla or specific flours, would have largely confined that practice to those with the necessary resources and leisure time, namely the aristocracy and the priesthood. So while the scent of roasting cacao might drift from a noble's kitchen or a temple precinct, signaling an upcoming feast or ritual for many ordinary Maya, the direct experience of drinking the frothed, spicy, bitter ceremonial cacao was likely infrequent, if ever. But its sacred importance, its association with their rulers, their gods, and their deepest beliefs about the cosmos would have been known to all. It was a drink that permeated their culture even if its most potent forms were sipped only by a select few in moments charged with power, sanctity, and divine connection. You've now seen that the privilege of sipping the sacred frothy cacao was largely reserved for the Mayan elite. The kings, nobles, priests, and perhaps esteemed warriors. This exclusivity wasn't just about controlling a luxury good. It was deeply tied to the multifaceted role cacao played in Mayan society as a potent symbol of status, a conduit of power, and a substance believed to impart not just spiritual connection, but perhaps even tangible benefits like energy and focus. For the Mayan, upper crust cacao was far more than a beverage. It was noble's nectar and quite possibly a source of warrior's might. Imagine a Mayan ahau, or king, presiding over his court. He is a figure of immense power, the linchpin between the earthly realm and the divine. His attire is splendid, his words carry the weight of authority, and in his hand, or being presented to him by an attendant, is often a beautifully crafted vessel containing frothy cacao. The very act of consuming this drink in such a public ceremonial setting was a performance of status. It visually reinforced his elite position, his access to a precious commodity that was both divinely sanctioned and economically valuable. The mainstream historical fact here is that cacao consumption was a significant marker of elite status in classic Mayan society, with rulers and nobles frequently depicted on pottery murals and carved monuments partaking in cacao ceremonies, using it in feasts, and including cacao vessels and beans in their rich burial offerings. The giving and receiving of cacao, particularly the prepared drink or high-quality beans, was also a crucial element in Mayan diplomacy and political maneuvering. When emissaries from another city-state arrived or when alliances were being forged, the sharing of cacao would have been an integral part of the proceedings. It was a gesture of goodwill, a display of wealth and sophistication, and a way to bind agreements. Refusing a cup of cacao offered by a host or offering a substandard brew could have been a serious diplomatic faux pas, a sign of disrespect or even hostility. The quality of the cacao, the richness of its froth, the beauty of the vessel, all these would have been carefully scrutinized, silent messages conveying power and intent. You wouldn't want to serve your rival king a flat, lukewarm cup of watery cacao if you were trying to negotiate a favorable trade deal, that's for sure. Beyond its social and political significance, the Maya also likely recognized and valued the physiological effects of cacao. Cacao beans contain theobromine, a stimulant similar to caffeine, though generally milder and longer-lasting in its effects. For the Mayan elite, who often engaged in lengthy ceremonies, intricate political negotiations, or demanding intellectual pursuits like calendrical calculations and astronomical observations, the stimulating properties of cacao could have been highly beneficial. A cup of bitter, spicy cacao might have helped to sharpen the mind, increase alertness, and ward off fatigue during these important activities. It was the original Mayan power drink long before energy drinks in brightly colored cans. For warriors, cacao might have been consumed before battle or during arduous campaigns. Theobromine can increase heart rate and act as a vasodilator, potentially enhancing physical performance and endurance, at least modestly. Combined with the fiery kick of chili peppers, a common additive, the cacao drink could have been a potent pre-battle elixir, helping to invigorate the warriors and perhaps even instill a sense of divine favor or invincibility. The association of cacao with strength and elite status would have made it a fitting beverage to prepare men for the rigors and dangers of warfare. Drink this, feel the power of the jaguar god, and try not to get hit by any obsidian-tipped spears. Probably not the exact pep talk, but you get the idea. There's a quirky, though largely speculative tidbit that suggests certain cacao recipes might have been specifically tailored to enhance these stimulating or even aphrodisiac qualities, perhaps for use in specific rituals, or by individuals seeking particular effects. The Maya had an extensive knowledge of local flora, and it's plausible they experimented with various herbal additions to their cacao to modify or amplify its inherent properties. Imagine a warrior's brew with extra chili, and perhaps other invigorating herbs, or a sage's blend designed to promote mental clarity for priests or scribes. Historians still argue about the exact perceived potency of cacao as a stimulant or performance enhancer by the Maya themselves, compared to its symbolic and ritualistic value. Were they primarily drinking it for its spiritual connotations, with any physiological effects being a secondary benefit? Or were they consciously using it as a psychoactive or energizing substance in certain contexts? It was likely an inseparable blend of both. The sacred nature of the drink would have amplified any perceived physical effects, and its tangible stimulating properties would have reinforced its spiritual power. The very act of preparing the cacao, that laborious process of fermenting, drying, roasting, grinding, and frothing, also contributed to its value and the status of those who consumed it. It required significant time resources and specialized knowledge. all things more readily available to the elite. Owning cacao groves, controlling the trade in cacao beans, and being able to command the labor needed for its preparation were all indicators of wealth and power. Thus, the frothy, bitter nectar in those painted clay cups was far more than just a drink. It was a concentrated symbol of Mayan aristocratic life. A beverage that fueled their ceremonies, lubricated their politics, perhaps sharpened their minds and strengthened their warriors, all while reaffirming their privileged connection to the divine. You're now well acquainted with the Mayan elite, picturing them sipping their frothy, spicy cacao, a drink that was as much a symbol of their power and divine connection as it was a beverage. But how do we know all of this? How can we centuries later speak with such confidence about the ingredients, the preparation methods, and the ceremonial context of ancient Mayan cacao? The Maya, thankfully, were not silent about their love for this sacred bean. They left behind a rich and varied record, a trail of artistic and textual clues that archaeologists and epigraphers have painstakingly pieced together, allowing us to almost taste and smell those ancient rituals. Our knowledge comes largely from reading the past through their vibrant pottery, their intricate stone carvings, and the precious few written codices that survived the ravages of time and conquest. One of the most direct and visually stunning sources of information comes from classic Mayan painted ceramic vessels. Those beautiful cylindrical vases, bowls, and spouted pots we've already admired. Many of these are adorned with incredibly detailed scenes depicting courtly life, mythological events, and, crucially, rituals involving cacao. You can see lords and ladies elegantly holding frothing cacao cups, attendants pouring the beverage from one vessel to another, to create that prized foam, and even mythological figures interacting with cacao pods or trees. This is a mainstream historical fact. Mayan painted pottery from the classic period c. 250–900 CE frequently features intricate scenes and hieroglyphic texts that explicitly depict cacao consumption. Its preparation, such as frothing, and its use in rituals, often naming the vessel's owner or its intended contents as cacao. These scenes are like snapshots from a lost world. You might see a ruler receiving tribute that includes bags of cacao beans, or a diplomatic meeting where cacao is being shared. Sometimes the vessels themselves are labeled with what scholars call the primary standard sequence, a band of hieroglyphs around the rim that often describes the type of vessel it is, e.g., his drinking cup, its contents, e.g., cacao or specific types of cacao drink, and sometimes the name and titles of its owner, or even the artist who painted it. It's like finding an ancient food label, incredibly specific and wonderfully informative. For example, a glyph might specify that the drink within was flavored with chili or was a particular type of atole, a maize-based gruel mixed with cacao. Stone carvings and monumental inscriptions also provide clues. Stelae, upright stone slabs, and wall panels from Mayan cities often depict rulers and nobles engaged in important ceremonies where cacao consumption was likely involved, even if not explicitly shown in every instance. Tribute lists carved in stone might enumerate quantities of cacao beans owed to a ruling lord, underscoring its economic importance. Images of gods associated with cacao, like god El or the maize god, are frequently found in these monumental contexts, further linking cacao to the highest levels of power and religious belief. Then there are the Mayan codices, the screenfold books made from bark paper, of which only a precious few, the Dresden, Madrid, and Paris codices, and the more recently authenticated Grolier Codex, now known as the Maya Codex of Mexico, survived the Spanish conquest. These texts, filled with intricate drawings and hieroglyphs, deal primarily with astronomical calculations, divination, and religious rituals. While they may not contain step-by-step recipes in the modern sense, they do feature gods associated with cacao, depict offerings that include cacao, and contain glyphs for cacao in various ritual contexts, providing invaluable insights into its sacred role. The Dresden Codex, for instance, shows images of gods holding cacao pods or consuming substances from vessels that are likely cacao. There's a fascinating, quirky tidbit related to the interpretation of these ancient images. Sometimes the artists who painted the ceramic vessels included humorous or unusually candid details. You might find a scene of a slightly tipsy-looking lord, after too much feasting and perhaps cacao, which could be mixed with fermented beverages, or a depiction of a mischievous monkey, a common motif in Mayan art, stealing cacao pods. These little humanizing touches alongside the grand ceremonial scenes make the ancient Maya feel a bit more relatable even in their most sacred practices. It wasn't all solemn ritual. There was room for a bit of Mayan wit too. Archaeological science also plays a crucial role. Residue analysis of ancient pottery vessels has chemically confirmed the presence of theobromine and caffeine, the key alkaloids in cacao, in many of these iconic Mayan drinking cups, providing direct physical evidence that they were indeed used for cacao beverages. This scientific confirmation beautifully complements the artistic and textual evidence. Historians still argue about the precise translation and interpretation of certain rare cacao-related glyphs, or the exact ingredients implied by some iconographic shorthand. For example, what specific type of flour is being referred to by a particular glyph in a cacao recipe text on a pot? Or does a certain posture or gesture in a cacao drinking scene have a specific ritual meaning that we haven't yet fully deciphered? The study of Mayan cacao is an ongoing process of discovery with new insights emerging as more sites are excavated, more inscriptions are translated, and new analytical techniques are applied. So as you imagine that ancient Mayan priest carefully preparing the frothy, bitter, spicy cacao, remember that our ability to reconstruct this sacred ritual is thanks to these enduring messages from the past. The eloquent paintings on clay, the enduring carvings in stone, and the fragile but priceless pages of their sacred books. They are windows into a world where chocolate was not a sweet indulgence, but a divine essence, a gift meticulously prepared and ceremonially consumed. You've journeyed through the entire sacred process of ancient Mayan ceremonial cacao, from the mythical origins of the divine bean and its careful cultivation in rainforest groves, through the transformative rituals of fermentation, drying, roasting, and grinding. You've learned about the surprising spices and frothy crowns that adorned this potent elixir, the beautiful vessels that held it, its deep connections to Mayan cosmology, and the elite hands that predominantly partook in its consumption. We've even seen how vivid depictions on pottery and stone have allowed us to read these ancient recipes and rituals. Now, as our sleepy exploration of this rich tradition nears its end, let's reflect on the enduring legacy of this sacred brew and how these ancient Mayan practices continue to resonate in surprising ways today. The reverence the Maya held for cacao, their understanding of it as a food of the gods, meant for more than just casual consumption, has not entirely vanished from the world. While the Spanish conquest in the 16th century brought catastrophic changes to Mayan civilization, including the suppression of many indigenous religious practices, the cultural importance of cacao in Mesoamerica persisted, albeit often transformed and blended with new influences. The Spanish themselves, after initially finding the bitter spicy Mayan xocolotl, a Nahuatl term from which chocolate derives, though the Maya had their own words like cacao, rather unpalatable, eventually adapted it to their own tastes, adding sugar milk and European spices like cinnamon and vanilla, which, ironically, was also native to Mesoamerica. This sweeter version, of course, went on to conquer the world. However, the more traditional ceremonial uses of cacao didn't entirely disappear. In many indigenous communities throughout Mesoamerica, descendants of the Maya and other ancient cultures have continued to cultivate cacao and use it in ways that echo ancient practices, often for local rituals, medicinal purposes, or special community gatherings. This is a mainstream historical fact. Traditional, less sweetened, and often spiced cacao beverages continue to be consumed in parts of Mexico and Central America, particularly among indigenous communities, sometimes in contexts that retain echoes of pre-Columbian ceremonial uses, highlighting the deep cultural roots of cacao in the region. These traditions passed down through generations represent a living link to the ancient Mayan reverence for the bean. In recent years, there has been a fascinating global resurgence of interest in what is often termed ceremonial cacao. This modern movement, while distinct from ancient Mayan practice and often blended with New Age spirituality or wellness philosophies, consciously seeks to reconnect with the idea of cacao as a sacred plant medicine, a heart opener, and a tool for spiritual connection rather than just a confection. People gather in cacao ceremonies around the world drinking minimally processed, unsweetened, or lightly sweetened, often spiced cacao beverages, with the intention of fostering community, promoting emotional release, or enhancing meditation and inner work. While these modern ceremonies are not direct replications of ancient Mayan rituals about which we still have much to learn, they often draw inspiration from the indigenous understanding of cacao as a powerful sacred substance. They emphasize mindful preparation, intentional consumption, and a respect for the spirit of the cacao. You might even see participants in these modern ceremonies attempting to create froth, perhaps not by pouring from great heights, but with dedicated whisks, valuing that airy crown much as the Maya did. There's a rather lovely quirky tidbit in how some modern artisanal chocolate makers are also looking back to ancient Mesoamerican traditions. They are focusing on bean-to-bar production, sourcing high-quality, ethically grown cacao, and experimenting with traditional processing methods like stone grinding. Some even create drinking chocolates that are less sweet and incorporate spices like chili, cinnamon, or cardamom, offering a taste experience that is perhaps closer to what an ancient Mayan noble might have enjoyed than your average supermarket chocolate bar. It's a delicious way of honoring that ancient heritage. They might not be chanting prayers over their grinders, but the respect for the bean is there. It's like archaeology you can eat. Historians still argue about the precise continuity of specific ancient Mayan cacao rituals into modern indigenous practices and the degree to which contemporary ceremonial cacao movements accurately reflect ancient beliefs versus being a modern reinterpretation. It's a complex interplay of historical memory, cultural adaptation, and contemporary spiritual seeking. What is undeniable, however, is that the ancient Mayan understanding of cacao as something more than just food, as something sacred, powerful, and transformative, is experiencing a global renaissance. The legacy of Mayan ceremonial cacao preparation reminds us that the things we consume can have meaning far beyond their nutritional value or simple taste. It speaks to a way of life where food preparation was an act of reverence, where natural ingredients were seen as divine gifts, and where sharing a particular beverage could forge connections between humans and between humans and the divine. The careful multi-stage process, from nurturing the tree to frothing the final drink, was a testament to their patience, their artistry, and their deep spiritual understanding. So as you drift off to sleep, perhaps you can imagine the faint lingering aroma of that ancient Mayan cacao, bitter, spicy, earthy, and deeply sacred. The echoes of their chants, the rhythm of their grinding stones, the sight of that perfect foamy crown, all serve as a gentle reminder of a civilization that found divinity in a humble being and transformed its preparation into a profound and beautiful ritual. And now the story of the sacred Mayan cacao, from its mythical birth in the jungle to its frothy culmination in the ceremonial cup, gently fades into the quiet of the night. The vibrant cities of the Maya, with their towering pyramids and bustling plazas, now rest silently under a blanket of stars, and the encroaching rainforest, their deepest mysteries still only partially unveiled. The echoes of their ancient rituals, the murmur of prayers offered to the gods of rain and maize and cacao itself, grow softer and more distant. Let the meticulous care of the Mayan farmer tending his sacred grove, the patient rhythm of the grinding stone, the almost magical transformation of bean into bitter, potent elixir, all become soothing, gentle images in your mind. The world of the ancient Maya, with its profound connection to nature and the cosmos, now recedes, leaving behind only a sense of peace and the lingering, dreamlike aroma of something wonderfully old and sacred. Allow yourself to sink deeper into your rest, into that quiet space where only the soft rhythm of your own breathing remains. The journey is complete and a deep, untroubled sleep awaits.